Well, the last time we talked to Debbie Hutchins, she talked about the spark that led her from her first concerts to becoming a professional sound engineer in the Canadian music scene. This time, we're going to talk about some of the shows that Debbie has worked on and the preparation that goes into those shows. This is part 2 of our resource stage conversations with Debbie Hutchins, professional sound engineer, production and tour manager. Okay, so we're back with Debbie, and we're going to talk a little bit in this part 2 about some of your experiences maybe on the road, or maybe some of your experiences with technology that you can share and maybe give us some insight as to how you use this stuff. So I guess the first question is there any in particular show or story that kind of stands out as an interesting one?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. I think right now, off the top of my head, the most challenging ones to do are the symphony shows, when you're taking a rock band and putting that with a symphony orchestra and trying to combine all those different elements and 2 different groups that approach audio and sound and reinforcement in 2 different ways. That's probably been one of the most challenging ones that I think I've experienced, probably.
So if you do that sort of thing, how much prep time do you get? Like how is it just another gig, or is it something where you're involved with the preparation and discussing how all of that's going to fit together?
Usually, if it's up to me, as much preparation as possible. So, for example, I just, in February, I got to mix Serena Ryder doing her symphonic debut with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, and that was amazing. But we spent, weeks, months planning it with the audio team there in terms of what Serena was going to do, what instruments we wanted to use for the symphony, so what the orchestra layout's going to be, how we're going to mic it, how we're going to mix the front of house console. And I got them to send me stems. So they'd had one of their house symphony guys kind of mix all the symphony channels down to 10 stems for me. And then we ended up breaking out. Serena was doing solo for this performance. But they had a symphony drum set with a drummer, a bass player, and piano, kind of like the rhythm primary instruments. So I said, you know what, give me those ones. Let me add those in. So I had sort of like the standard pop rock input list, if you will. So the drums, piano, electric guitar, bass, and then I had Serena's channels, and then I had the 10 stems as well, plus the conductor mic and the MC mic. So I was mixing all that, and then we had a monitor tech on stage to look after Serena on in-ears, but then also the symphony as well. So lots of advanced planning, input list patching, cabling, where are the artists coming on and off from, all of that stuff needs to be coordinated. And ironically, we spend a lot of time with the audio reinforcement in order to make it sound like there's no audio reinforcement whatsoever, right? You just want it to be there and sound completely transparent. Nobody wants to hear a symphony that sounds electronic. It should just be like the sound is just there. You can't really hear that it sounds a huge difference. So it's one of the most challenging gigs to sort of do that. And because the symphony is very structured with their timing due to their unions, when we do the rehearsal, their downbeat is at 10 a.m., and they start, it's not like a rock band. I'm like, hey guys, my console crashed. Can you go grab a coffee and come back in 10 minutes? They'll be like, yeah, sure, Deb. It's a symphony. They're starting. So, very, very time specific. It has to be done. Everything has to be done clean and properly and be working. And it's very slick. And we had a great team there at the facility. So that was wonderful.
Oh, that's neat. So when something like that happens, is it usually, do you have anything to do with who the symphony tech is and that sort of thing? Or there's usually a tech that works with that symphony, and that's who you're always, whoever that is, that's who you're working with?
I mean, it just depends on the venue. That specific venue was the Centennial Auditorium, so they have an IATSE crew there, so that would get dictated by the union steward who go through the seniority list. But sometimes it might be an arena show where they're just bringing a symphony in, so it might just be the local labor pool or production company that they've brought in. Neil Cameron was on the audio crew for that, so he and I worked together for many, many years, and he ended up doing monitors, so that was great to work with him, so that was a real highlight. But there's a lot of preparation to do those shows well. You can't just walk in that day, and I already had a show file built, all of those things on your digital console to prepare to come in to make it as smooth as possible.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple technical questions about this then, because it's kind of interesting. How are you getting stems from their console? Are you getting, are they Dante stems, or are you using MADI, or it obviously depends on what consoles, that kind of thing. How would you have done that on a show like that?
Again, it sort of depends on what the facility has in place there. So I think we just did analog stems. They just rent it from their house console. yeah, I think it was like a 12 pair just down to me from
Okay.
their booth or where their house console is. So very kind of old school.
And so
So.
then, are you mixing monitors for the Symphony as well, or sorry, is that happening as well on the separate console, or and then you guys are mixing monitors for your side of things, or how does that work?
I mean, so that particular show, we had three operators. So it was me doing front of house
Right.
for the main bulk of it. We had the symphony audio technician taking the symphony lines and feeding me the stem lines, and then we had a monitor operator as well with a separate monitor console on stage, who was also getting the 10 stem lines and had also broken out the drums and the piano. Because I had said to them, the symphony kind of thinks of all of their symphony as one moving part, but in pop, somebody would want to hear more kick drum or less snare, whereas a symphony would want to hear the whole drum kit as a whole. So you've got to kind of understand what the musicians are going to need. And because Serena Ryder was on in-ears, I said to the audio crew, she's going to want to hear more hi-hat or less rack tom or more kick drum, that it would be a very pop centered, like an artist who does pop would want to have that, or I want to hear less piano, more bass, whereas an orchestra would kind of blend everything a little bit more together. So it was essential to have a monitor tech separate just to handle the symphony, and that'd be way too much work. And plus, I'm usually so far back. I'm like 125 feet back from the stage. So trying to have intimacy in terms of monitoring for the artist would be, I would not recommend doing that from front of house unless you're very comfortable with the symphony, of course, so.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. If you're doing live shows all the time, at some point in time, these live shows need to be recorded. Somebody's going to say this needs to be on a broadcast, or they're going to do a YouTube thing or something like that. How does that change your approach to things? How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, again, the advent of technology in terms of recording live shows has grown in leaps and bounds, has become a lot more cost effective, certainly in the last few years. And there's more expectations of artists that their shows are being recorded or archived. So a couple of options is, one, you can just set up, a couple of microphones and a small little audio processor box at front of house and record it into your GarageBand on your laptop is a very cheap and inexpensive way to do it.
Right.
You could go right up to Digico has like a USB to MADI interface that they can multi-track onto like a Pro Tools or any kind of recording software like that.
Right.
If it's a large enough multi-mix event, then you get a splitter, and they would have a separate truck, like a Doug McClement would come in and take a whole separate split off of everything and mix it separately. So it really depends on the budget and what they're going to be using it for sure.
Okay. And so when you're doing that kind of thing, again, how much prep work do you get for that? How much interaction are you having to do with whoever it is that's, the truck or whoever? Or are you kind of, this is another date on the tour and this is what we're going to do?
Well, usually if it's a multi-operator setup that has a truck with an audio operator, that usually, in my experience, is a lot of work in advance. They'll want to know the input list. They'll have to figure out the patching, the cable runs, where they're getting their power from. Even as a production manager, it's like parking permits. Where do they park? How do we keep, they're going to have a cable running through a door. You need security there so you don't have fans just walking in, right? So there's a lot of layers and to make sure it's all done properly. And then usually when we're doing a line check, there'll be the truck will have an audio representative on the stage, with a walkie-talkie to them in the truck, and then we're dealing with squawk boxes or communication on stage in terms of front of house and monitoring. Usually how it runs. So.
Right. Okay. What do you think is some of the most interesting shows, or one of the most interesting shows that you've worked on?
That's a great question. Sometimes the most fun ones, I think, off the top of my head, are like the festival shows where you have so little time. You literally have a changeover and you have to go. And it's really stressful. That first couple of seconds, a band walks out and you're just like, oh my gosh, and you're just scrambling to get your mix up and running. But there can be some really, really great shows, especially when there's been a full day of great musical acts, and then your band is on there too, and you just feel like you're part of a really great day of music. I mean, those would be the most fun I think I've ever had. I think my favorite style of working is when I have a tour, when you're working with the same musicians, the same crew. And the first week of any tour is always crazy, always stressful, and never enough time. And everyone's running around, but then you kind of get over that hump, and then you kind of get into like just cruising altitude, and you're just knocking the shows off. And when you have a great group of people that are working together, there is nothing that you can't problem solve the day of the show.
Right.
And that's really my favorite experience. And then everyone's less focused on rushing around, flailing of gigs like we've all done. And it really becomes a really fun, friendly environment. Everyone's a team. And I think everyone does their best work when they're calm and relaxed. And then it's just focusing on excellence every day and making it smoother, slicker, faster every day. And that's really my favorite style, because it's almost as much work sometimes to get out on a tour to get it up and running as it is to do just a bunch of one-offs. Like, you still have to kind of get the train up and running out of the station, so to speak. So it's definitely my best experiences. I've been on like long-term tours. Some really great friendships have come out of those years.
I think that sometimes people figure that a long-term tour is exactly the same as you said, a one-time gig where, you just go, you pick up the gear, you run out and go and start doing the show. But I haven't really been involved with a lot of touring, but everybody I've talked to, my impression is that there's a lot of work that needs to go into prepping these tours. You've got a ton of stuff going on. So how much prep work would you do beforehand for a tour, specifically on the gear end of things, as far as figuring out what gear you're going to use, figuring out how it's going to be packaged, that sort of thing? How are you talking days? Are you talking weeks? How does that work?
I mean, usually for a large scale kind of national tour, like at least across the country, depending on the size of venues you're going to be playing, I would probably start a year out for crew. What you really want to do is get your key people in place. Like, if you've had the same people for a long time, you want to get them booked in, even if you don't have the official start and end dates, or even the band, and say, hey guys, next fall or next spring, just there's something going to be happening in there. And then once you get a little bit closer, once you get the band's requirements confirmed, instead of they're doing a 5-piece, we're doing a full string section, we're doing a symphony tour, we're doing a solo tour, then you get all that coordinated. Then you can put your production specs together of what you want to do. So things that would determine console selection are obviously the budget, the size of the console. So if you're playing really small tours, where they're like every seat counts, we think we're going to sell out. You want to have a small console.
Right.
If you're going to be traveling in a minivan, you can't be carrying a giant console, right? So all of those things kind of get factored into it. And then that could start maybe 3 or 4 months out, certainly. And then usually I would say about 2 months out, you want to start advancing the actual dates. What time do we load in? And what's the local crew call going to be? You get your technical writer together and get that sent out. I usually am on the artist side, and I always struggling to try to get a hold of venues, and I work at venues sometimes too, coming in as a local crew, and the TDs are saying they can't get a hold of, the artist, tour manager, or production manager. So, communication is key. The earlier you can do it, the better, for sure. So.
Right. Okay, so I have one more question for you. You mentioned earlier on that when you were at, I guess it was at Mohawk, that you met your first rock and roll chick. Is that what you said?
Oh, Humber College.
At Humber College.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
They had a live sound course, yeah.
So my question is there's still not a lot of women in this industry. It's growing for sure. Any thoughts on that?
It's interesting because I just did a video chat with Grumpy Roadie, which is a YouTube channel this week about women. There's a group of women in the live entertainment industry. So we were talking about different aspects of it. They had lighting and carbs, and myself and audio,
yep,
and a few other audio folks too. So it's great. And I think the consensus was it's getting a lot better. We're seeing more and more women on the road. And again, I grew up, when I went to school, there was no internet. There really wasn't a lot of places to go and find information. Like, I had to go to the college library and, sign out a magazine just to sort of find out about that. But now there's like soundgirls.org. Right. There's so much information about there to educate people and sort of get connected or whatever. My advice for anybody is just get going, do something, like start volunteering. Don't worry about the money when you're just starting out. That's going to take a while to build, but just make those networks and make those connections. Right. And the more that you can do and show yourself, and if you're passionate about what you do, again, the money will come later. It will become a living later on. But if you can just start, and because there's a lot of, if you're going to get into operating, whether it's lighting or audio, there's a lot to learn. So the earlier you can get on and get hands-on experience. And again, we sort of started our chat talking about how there can be quite a difference of, you can have a lot of post-secondary school training and not necessarily be reflective of how your job. And that's a perfect example. You could read a million books on how to mix a show, but until you're there, the band walks out and it's you in that one hot seat, it's a whole different thing. So you really just need to get as much skill set. There's that saying, 10,000 hours before you get good at anything, right? So just get out there and get going in any way, shape, or form,
Oh, that's great. That's cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you taking the time. It is great to talk to you. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. It's great to chat. One of the great things about the pandemic is people are actually connecting more and taking time to have these longer discussions and check in with people and how did you get to where you are. And normally we're all pretty busy to do this kind of stuff. So it's one of the perks of everyone kind of slowing down a little bit to check in with each other and make these new connections. So it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. There's lots of people who fall in love with the idea of getting involved with this industry. The lights, the sound, the video. Well, Debbie Hutchins has proven that through determination and drive, through volunteering and studying and dedication and sometimes just showing up, how it has led her to become a long-time respected and trusted sound engineer and tour manager in the Canadian music scene with the likes of Leahy, Jan Arden, and David Wilcox, and so many more. If you'd like to know more about the Grumpy Roadie episode that Debbie was involved with, go to Facebook and find them there. If you're interested in Sound Girls, you can find them at www.soundgirls.org. You can find more Resource Stage Conversations at resourcestage.ca. Resource Stage Conversations is a production of Horizon Solutions. Horizon has the privilege to work with professional and amateur theaters and schools across Canada to provide technical solutions for live performance, and now more than ever, live streaming. You can find us at horizonsolutions.net. If you like what we're doing here with the Resource Stage Conversations, feel free to subscribe so you're one of the first to hear about our next videos. I'm Carl Lukings. Thanks for joining us for Resource Stage Conversations.